do strange things, and then I think she died.
I hadn't heard that, but I hadn't seen any of those people. Well, I went to the banquet for the University High School reunion. That was after Sherwood had died, because I remember going with Johnny Butler and her family.
Oh, that was a long time ago, because she's real not doing well at all.
I heard that. But, you know, Lee was there, and he was hanging out with, what's his name, Lamb. Bill Lamb. And I realized finally that Lee didn't know who I was. He didn't recognize me. Eventually he did, but initially he didn't for whatever reason, or maybe he was having a lapse of memory also. Because I thought, well, how could you not know me as good of friends as we were?
You know, sometimes you can know somebody's face and the name just won't. That happens to me in the middle of the night. I'll think of a face and I think.
We were talking about it.
I knew Lucy Turnbull. The last time I saw her, she was heavier and had her hair back like this. She's kind of diminished a little bit. And the only thing Elizabeth said, that had to be Lucy Turnbull. Do you know when I decided it was? She has never engaged. She has never been animated. And this woman did not animate.
Yeah. You tell us now when you're ready, Mickey.
You're just rolling right along, so just go with the conversation. We're ready.
Well, let's just change the direction of the conversation a little bit, because the main thing we want to do this afternoon is give Billy Ross Brown, who's a member of an old, distinguished Oxford family, and plenty distinguished on his own, a chance to talk about his memories of the campus and of the town and growing up here during the period when we all did in the 30s and 40s and early 50s. Bill, tell us what you want to tell.
Well, my home was at the very end of this street, right out here, on the right-hand side, the last house on South 8th Street. And I had access to the University Woods through my granddaddy's mule pasture. And so a lot of times I'd go to school, to University High School, through the woods.
Yeah.
Especially the football practice.
Right.
But we had a good neighborhood. Jerry Pancratz lived in this house right over here.
She married Howard Duval.
Right. And R.C. Cook lived in a house right catty cornered over here. And you remember Redaloo?
Redaloo, and they went down to Mississippi Southern.
That's right.
Where he became president there.
He became president, and they gave me a wedding gift that I still use.
Is that right?
Have it out every day.
Well, and there were, the one son in the family was older than we were, but the Kennons, who were eccentric people, to say the least, lived on this street at that time. And do you remember them, Bill?
Oh, yeah. I remember their son, Sykes.
Sykes, yeah.
I do.
And was Clifford living here then?
Who?
Clifford, the Foxes?
They were living right next
in
door.
that little house next door.
And then there was the Morgan family in this house right next door here.
Right.
4 of them.
But they didn't come along until a little bit later, because when I found my mother's notes on my 5th birthday party, they weren't here yet.
Is that right?
And I guess that house wasn't built yet. Probably in the process.
What date would that have been?
My 5th birthday would have been in 1939.
I'm thinking that house was built
Are you?
at that time.
And Howard Duval lived across the street,
Oh, yeah.
up here and across the street.
And the Moonies had a big
The Moonies.
on up the street up there.
And there was a
And of course-
barn back there.
Oh, a big
And they had
barn.
cows.
Had
And you
cows.
can't think about it. Had a milk cow in the back.
Yes, sir.
Right back over here.
Well, that was very common in small towns to have that, because I remember Vassar Bishop talking about it too, and they had all that at the house, the family house that she moved into on 5th Street.
And do strange things, and then I think she died.
I hadn't heard that, but I hadn't seen any of those people. Well, I went to the banquet for the University High School reunion. That was after Sherwood had died, because I remember going with Johnny Butler and her family.
Oh, that was a long time ago because she's real not doing well at all.
I heard that. But you know, Lee was there, and he was hanging out with, what's his name, Lamb, Bill Lamb. And I realized finally that Lee didn't know who I was. He didn't recognize me. Eventually he did, but initially he didn't for whatever reason, or maybe he was having a lapse of memory also. Because I thought, well, how could you not know me as good of friends as we were?
You know, sometimes you can know somebody's face and the name just won't. That happens to me in the middle of the night. I'll think of a face and I think,
We were talking about it.
I knew Lucy Turnbull. The last time I saw her, she was heavier and had her hair back like this. She's kind of diminished a little bit. And the only thing Elizabeth said, that had to be Lucy Turnbull. Do you know when I decided it was? She has never engaged. She has never been animated. And this woman did not animate.
Yeah. You tell us now when you're ready, Mickey.
You're just rolling right along, so just go with the conversation. We're ready.
Well, let's just change the direction of the conversation a little bit, because the main thing we want to do this afternoon is give Billy Ross Brown, who's a member of an old distinguished Oxford family and plenty distinguished on his own, a chance to talk about his memories of the campus and of the town and growing up here during the period when we all did in the 30s and 40s and early 50s. Bill, tell us what you want to tell.
Well, my home was at the very end of this street, right out here, on the right-hand side, the last house on South 8th Street. And I had access to the University Woods through my granddaddy's mule pasture. And so a lot of times I'd go to school, to University High School, through the woods,
Yeah,
especially the football practice.
right.
But we had a good neighborhood. Jerry Pancratz lived in this house right over here.
She married Howard Duval.
Right. And R.C. Cook lived in the house right kitty cornered over here. And you remember Redaloo?
Redaloo, and they went down to Mississippi Southern.
That's right.
Where he became president there.
He became president, and they gave me a wedding gift that I still use.
Is that right?
Have it out every day.
Well, and there were, the one son in the family was older than we were, but the Kennons, who were eccentric people, to say the least, lived on this street at that time. And do you remember them, Bill?
Oh, yeah. I remember their son, Sykes.
Sykes, yeah.
I do.
And was Clifford living here then?
Who?
Clifford, the Foxes?
They were living right next
In
door.
that little house next door.
And then there was the Morgan family in this house right next door here.
Right.
4 of them.
But they didn't come along until a little bit later, because when I found my mother's notes on my 5th birthday party, they weren't here yet.
Is that right?
And I guess that house wasn't built yet. Probably in the process.
What date would that have been?
My 5th birthday would have been in 1939.
I'm thinking that house was built
Are you?
at that time.
And Howard Duval lived across the street,
Oh, yeah.
up here and across the street.
And the Moonies had a big
The Moonies.
on up the street up there.
And there was a
of course-
barn back there.
Oh, a big
And they had
barn.
cows.
Had
And you
cow.
can't think about it, had a milk cow in the back.
Yes, sir.
Right back over here.
Well, that was very common in small towns to have that, because I remember Vassar Bishop talking about it too, and they had all that at the house, the family house that she moved into on 5th Street, and all of the property going down the hill from 5th Street toward town was all a cotton field at that time. She told me years ago when she was a child. That's been a while. I don't know who else you remember that lived here on this street.
Well, later years, Lee McCarty and his
Yeah.
wife
Right.
lived in a little house in the ditch.
Lee and Pup.
Hmm
And she made jewelry then.
She made me a pair of cufflinks. I still got one. I've lost one, but I still got one. Fired it in a kill.
And he taught us chemistry.
Well, he tried to teach my class biology, and he knew less biology than I did.
But he was a lot of fun.
Well, that too.
And he had the table of elements up on the big screen, table of elements. Learn the table of elements, and that was about all we were required to do, was learn the table of elements. And he would throw things together over the Bunsen burner and turn it on and watch things happen. And he was as surprised as we were at what happened. But he could play the piano, and remember how he would take us down to the library where there was a piano and play jazz.
I don't remember that.
And we had field trips. Remember the field trips we took to Jim's Steakhouse and to the Pink Palace?
I think I must have graduated by then. I don't remember those
Oh, he
outings.
loved to take us on field trips. He really didn't enjoy teaching that much. Life was just so much fun for him.
Absolutely was.
Let me ask you, Bill, where was your grandfather's mule pasture?
It was between our house
Yeah.
and Faulkner's land, part of Bailey Woods.
So it was down in that hollow.
Exactly right.
It was kind of steep back in there.
It was steep. It was.
Do you remember one of the big snows and we came over there and had sleds? All people had gotten new. I didn't have a new sled, but other people had new. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Those are some good hills.
Well, anyway, beyond this immediate neighborhood, when we get to the campus, well, you had to have had a whole additional life once you got, well, I don't know how much time you spent out there as a child. Maybe a lot, maybe not.
Let's see. Ted Jr. lived in the apartment building right after you cross the
Right.
railroad bridge.
Right?
And he and I spent a good bit of time.
Yeah,
together.
yeah. You all about the same age, I think.
Yeah. I'm a little older than, was a little older than Ted. 6 months maybe.
And the houses going down University Avenue that I loved are no longer there. On the north side of University Avenue, as you go out to all those beautiful big old white houses, there was the Level Home, the big brick house that is now where the Ford Center is,
Mm-hmm.
and then the little cottage that was the Pancratz home,
Mm-hmm.
and then all the little houses. They're two-story white frame houses that are not there anymore. And Bill, tell us about the T-Hound.
You know, I remember it quite well, but I don't remember who built it. I think Miss Ella Somerville had something to do with building that T-House. Whether she had put money into it or not, I don't know.
She ran it for a while.
It's where we had our dances, I know that.
Yeah. Here you are.
I will.
How are you?
Good to see you.
You guys are all wired.
Hey, how are you?
We are
doing?
indeed. Yeah.
Good to
You,
see you.
you want some water or a Coke or anything?
I'm fine, thank you.
Well, anyway, I know she ran the T-Hound. Whether she had anything to do with building it, I don't know.
Maybe that's what I have in mind. She actually ran it.
She did, because I remember when she did, and I remember when she sold the place and was getting rid of her assets there. She had a platter I wanted. I was only about 9 years old. I don't know what I wanted with that platter. But my mother bought it for me, and I have it and use it till yet. And it came from her place.
That was the party place, the T-Hound, when you had dances.
Exactly
That
right.
and the old mansion house. Tell them about the old mansion house. I love the mansion house, the Seas mansion house. Do you remember that well? The Seas mansion house where...
Oh, yes, yes.
Sure you do. What, Holly Sweet Tooth, is that about where it would be now?
Mm-hmm.
Or down
Yep.
from that, someplace around there?
And you know who built that initially?
I don't.
I think I'm right. John Lee Gainey
Are you kidding?
built it was just like it only had one room.
It was like a toddle house.
A toddle house.
Yeah,
exactly
that's
right.
what I
didn't know
remember.
that.
And they had a bar.
And then they began expanding back.
Exactly right. And south into the back.
Yeah.
And big, and made it look like a mansion. And that's where we had our dances, because they had strobe lighting, remember?
Sure they did.
And you'd dance around in a circle, and then when we were in the 7th and 8th grade, and then they'd clap their hands, and you'd have to go and dance with the next girl until they clapped their hands again. Do you remember that?
Curtis has rather more rowdy tales to tell about times at the mansion when his group was coming along. It's where the Shivers had our rehearsal dinner, because it was one of the few big places in town that you could rent and use that way, but you could. And had the usual Oxford arrangement. You can drink all the liquor you can bring. Just don't expect us to furnish any of it. And but anyway, it was a lot of parties over the years there.
And Bill, do you remember the community center, which is now where the Oxford Park Commission is, under the water tower?
Mm-hmm. Sure I do. Yeah.
Well, we had parties there
I'm
too.
dancing to Stardust in there.
And do you remember who played for us?
Who played for?
Do you remember the Southerners?
Yeah, sure.
And you know that was Bill. They're the same. Bill Russell
Andrew?
and Andrew Fox and Billy Cole, and they're still playing jazz now together sometime.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know Andrew Fox. And we took it for granted. We thought, well, yeah, that's live music. Why not? But when you get older, you think, my goodness, they had talent. They were good.
Oh, sure they were good. Ed played drums, you know.
He sure did. I forgot that.
Yeah.
I forgot that too.
He was a good drum.
It was
Played
good.
in the marching band, too.
He did.
Mm-hmm.
I remember we had a Halloween party there one time, and Billy Ross Brown came as Miss Yalobusha County. And I was new and I didn't know there was any place called Yalobusha County. And you had a mop or something. Do you remember that on your head? And I thought, and you looked right nice. And I thought, Yalobusha County, what is that? I thought it's something you made up. I didn't know there's any place called Yalobusha County.
I had to be so amused, and when I shared it with Harter, she was even more so. If you're telling me that your dad was paying you, was it $25 a month to look after the...
No, a week.
A week? So that was a right good deal of money for a 14-year-old boy at that time.
Well, I was getting day labor. Wages.
Well,
I was just like any of the rest of them.
well, I understood your responsibilities, as you told me, were to look after the boat, given that Colonel Evans was going to stay out there and William Faulkner, and I don't know what your father thought, but I expect he thought, well, they might sink the blame thing. I need Bill or somebody out there to keep an eye on what they're up to.
We was
So,
out there about 30 days.
well, tell us about it.
Well, I wish I'd have brought my pictures of it.
Well, we'll have another session with pictures.
It was a 44-foot, about 14 feet, scow bow, made out of cypress, put together with anchor-fast nails. And you had to drill a hole, and then you drove the nails in there because they were what they call anchor-fast. You couldn't pull them out once you hammered them in. And Colonel Evans built it in his backyard. And the owners of the boat were Dr. A.H. Little, Colonel Evans, and my mother and father. And
Min McGarry. Min McGarry.
named for the three wives, Minna Ruth Little, Mary
Evans.
and Maggie Brown. And Faulkner came up with that name. But he worked on the boat, Faulkner did, every day, but didn't have any financial interest in it whatsoever because he had just sold Intruder in the Dust when we launched the boat. It was 1948, and he just received the money from Intruder in the Dust, selling the rights.
Yeah.
For a period of time, they had it out in the front yard. I don't know if they were trying to. Do you remember that? They had it jacked up on
I remember
something
that.
in the front yard. Parts of it, not the whole thing, but parts of it were in the front yard jacked up.
Well, this was in the side yard where it was built.
Well, maybe the side yard. I remember
Between
going
the
by,
cedar
you could
trees.
see it, yeah.
This house is, I guess it's actually on Hayes.
That's right.
And
Right
it's,
across the street from Elsie Morgan's house.
Right,
yeah.
because I remember looking over there and seeing it.
And that was the ice storm year, I think. No, that was 48.
The ice storm was
47.
50, wasn't it? Was the ice storm in 50?
Well, I remember one in 47, so we've got a little bit of divergence here.
It could have been 47.
That's when I remember one because I was frantic to get to Washington, not to Washington, to Memphis to go to the ice follies, and I could. I was making my
The ice
family
kept you from the ice
miserable. Yeah. Oh. Well, anyway, you stayed out on the boat and kept those. Well,
I
what
was
did
the
you have? Huh?
chief cook and bottle washer.
Okay.
And when we'd come to town, Miss Mary would take me to the grocery store, and I'd pick out what they like to eat, and we'd take it to the boat, and it was always over in cans. And I was old enough I could cook breakfast,
Yeah.
and we had a butane stove on the boat, and a 50-pound ice chest. You could put a 50-pound block of ice in the ice chest, where we did have cold water.
Did you go anywhere on the boat while you were out there? Did you putt around a bit, or?
Well, yes. But the other story about the boat was that when the day we launched it, a week before they launched it, they had painted a water line on it. That's where the thing was a foot out of the water. The propeller wasn't under the water. On the motor, it had a 75 horsepower.
It misjudged just a little bit. The colonel didn't quite measure right.
Well, I think the architect of the boat wrote down on the plans where to put the water line. That's what he went by. But it wasn't anywhere near as heavy. And that summer, I spent making blocks of concrete we had a black working force up at the gin, and his name was Shady McFadden.
A wonderful name,
Yeah.
Shady McFadden.
And he prided himself on mixing concrete by hand.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of his chores. That whenever we mixed up concrete for a project, he was in charge of the mixing.
I see.
And so that's what I did part of the summer, was mix up ballast to put in the bottom of the boat.
To pull it down.
To get the motor under the water.
That's funny.
See, the motor's already put in the boat when we took it out there.
But you're not going anywhere till that motor contacts
So funny.
water.
But the boat was a fun boat.
We all enjoyed that boat. I had lots of happy memories on that boat.
Well, the 2 or 3 things I remember, just from things I've read, I guess. Miss Heffley came out there looking for a bunch of girls.
She was always looking for a bunch of girls, and she found us.
And I think
She
that,
finally found us, didn't
I
she?
think she
At the party.
that
didn't
this
she?
was not any place on any approved list. But Faulkner was there to greet her at his dapper best, saying, "Oh, Stell,
charmed her.
Stell, you look lovely tonight."
I've heard about that. I wasn't there, but I've heard about it.
Yeah, I don't know how she reacted, but I imagine she just did her hair as you imitate her and was quite flattered and quit her search for at least a little while.
You really had to like her. I mean, you really did have to like Miss Heffley.
Well, some did and some didn't, depending what kind of experiences they may have had. I knew girls that were, they thought, clever enough to get somebody to throw them down an evening gown to put over their jeans when they'd been out to the lake, where she invariably found out.
Well, she was just beyond her time.
She was before her time, I think.
Well,
Anyway,
she's very attractive.
I think Malcolm also writes a little bit about getting the boat out there, and I can't put my hands on his little book. I have got to find it, but it's as if,
Bittersweet.
yeah, have you got it?
I've got it.
Yeah. Bitter Weeds, I think it is. But
Bitterweeds, that's right. It's
in
bitterweed.
any case, as he tells of the excursion to get the boat, and nobody had even figured how to get the boat through town, for starters. They hadn't thought that out either. Because going through the square would be the only option. And once they got that far, they began to pick up people who wanted to go along and must have had their own cars. Well, my impression is you all had an entourage, if that's the right word, by the time you got to the lake.
Pretty much so.
Well, tell us.
We had a highway patrolman leading the boat.
Oh, well, now, I didn't know that we had that kind of
And we
organization.
didn't have that many highway patrolmen.
Not many. I don't remember this one's name.
But he took, and where did you take it? Did you take it,
Right to Engineer's Point.
oh, okay. All right,
And
right
it
at the
was on a
dam.
lowboy.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what a lowboy was at the time, but anyway, they built lower to the ground where we didn't have to pick the boat up too high to back under.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason they called it a lowboy.
I see.
And they just backed it off in the lake. The lake was pretty high at the time.
I see.
And I remember Faulkner kind of directing the launching of the boat. The colonel was just sitting there watching it go on. And my daddy had put an outboard boat in the water,
Mm-hmm.
and he was trying to pull it off.
But he didn't have enough weight.
Not enough. And anyway, I made concrete blocks and carried them out there. I learned to drive that summer,
I see.
and that's one of my jobs, was carrying the concrete in a pickup truck out to put the. And I don't know, but I think we put 4,000 or 5,000 pounds of concrete in the bottom of that to get it low enough to get the. And then another story, that's part of it. Then when we got it low enough, they cranked the boat, and the Do you know what I'm saying when I say the motor cavitated?
I think I do.
It sucked
Mm-hmm.
air, and it made the revolutions in the motor go too fast,
Way too fast.
way too fast, because it was pumping air. It was spinning under the water, but it's sucking air down. So Colonel said, well, we're going to have to build a baffle. And so we came back to town and we worked on the baffle. It had to do with a piece of angle iron that was going to fasten on the boat because it was a scow bow. And in order to fasten to the scow bow, you're going to have an angle.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a good many black people that were helping us with finishing up the boat. But wouldn't any of them get in the water to put the baffle on the bottom of the boat. Well, it ended up faulting, and we were the only ones that could swim. And we had to get in the water and fasten that baffle on the bottom of the boat, up under the scow bow.
You learned a lot.
Oh, I did. Oh, I sure did. And then Faulkner also made us have a watch on the boat and ring the ship's bell on the hour the whole night long. And we took turns doing that, of course, because he insisted that we do it right.
He went into his role. That was his role, wasn't it?
Yeah. But
He was the admiral of the ship.
Yeah.
Well, he was, and
He knew more
immediately.
about the boat than anybody else too, because he'd been around boats. You know, he caught a boat from New Orleans to France, so he knew all the terms.
Mm-hmm.
He's the only one that did the nautical terms, and he was a stickler for you using the right nautical terms when you're on that boat.
And he was role-playing. It was back to that side of him, it seems to me, that he would insist on things that in this case really didn't matter, except he wanted them to.
That's exactly right.
How about the sailboat? When did that come along?
I'll turn this
Arthur
off.
Guyton built that sailboat when he
Who
was
did?
Arthur Guyton.
Arthur Guyton built this. I didn't know that.
Yes, he
Yeah.
built it in his backyard. Dr. Guyton's house on South Lamar.
Right.
Right there on South 11th. I'm not going to answer it. It'll quit in a minute. Just about. I'm sorry.
And
Well-
how long had we had the boat before the sailboat came along?
He bought that sailboat after we launched them in McGarry, about a year later.
See, Arthur had been in school at Harvard, and he'd gotten into rowing and all the sports that went on the Charles River while he was there. And that's what got him so interested
Sailboat.
in having a sailboat in the first place. And I guess he was in the midst of building it when he contracted polio and couldn't go on. And Bill Faulkner saw it passing every day and wanted it, and Dr. Guyton sold it to him. And probably thought it was a good place for it to go.
That's correct. I don't remember the detail, but Bill Faulkner's the one that named it the Ring Dove.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
I don't know why he named it. I don't know what's behind the Ring Dove, but I knew that was the name of it, and that's what he called it.
I gather, too, and you will know this, that for a long time he wouldn't have any little auxiliary engine or anything on that sailboat. We were just going to sail with the wind, and if there wasn't any wind,
You stayed out.
you stayed out there, whoever you were stuck with. And it seems to me, over a period of time, he had a rather odd assortment of people on board that, well, you tell what you remember about it.
Well, finally they insisted, Miss Estelle insisted that he put some sort of power on the boat. And he went to Dr. Busby's sporting goods place.
Oh, okay.
And he bought a 5 horsepower little Johnson motor.
Putt.
It was really a putt. But it would get you back.
Yeah,
It'd
yeah.
take a while, but
Well, I think probably it was after one of these excursions and Estelle was along and other people when it got to be a sort of long time out there, and Estelle was getting pretty worn out with the whole scene.
And then it came loose and floated away or something, didn't it?
well, he left it at beached. Actually, it was on mud, and the water came up, and it covered the ring dove up. And finally, it came up so high but he knew exactly where it was. He had marked it with a compass, and he knew exactly where that boat was. And he put together Howard Duval and
I know Paul Pittman went out there one time. I don't know what he was doing on the thing, but they came back to the house, and I was down there when they got back. Who else besides Howard?
Ed?
VP Ferguson.
Oh, okay. We're off in a different era, folks.
And VP was a designated diver.
Okay.
Because I wasn't going to dive in that water. And Howard certainly wasn't going to do it. So that's the reason Faulkner and VP were good friends at the time. You know, he called Faulkner Captain Ahab.
That's right. That's where he got his name, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, at part of the time there, VP was living in Malcolm's little house. Do you remember that? I do.
I know he lived down the street from him for a while.
So they never found the boat.
Oh, yeah.
They found the boat.
Oh, VP dove down 18 feet
Got the boat.
and tied the
Glad to know. they got the
winch that we had on the houseboat, big hand winch, and tied it to the boat, and we got it to the top of the water, and then took the men McGarry and got it over where it was shallow, and we dropped the boat in the shallow water, and went back out and got the trailer and all, went back out there and put the boat on the trailer, pulled it down to Faulkner's house because it had to be repaired.
And then what happened to it?
Well, we took it back out.
Took it back out?
Yeah. We sailed on him several years after that. But that's another story. Howard could tell that story, too.
Well,
he
we don't.
did a good job of that.
Well, you have to tell it because Howard's not here to tell it for himself.
I've just about told the story. Oh, Estelle and Jill drove out to Cole's Landing, it was known at that time,
Yeah.
and brought a lunch. And we all had a picnic lunch on the boat that she had prepared. She was a good cook.
I know she was a good cook, and she always made something at that time that nobody else in this town made, which was not an elaborate dish. She made asparagus sandwiches. Do you remember those asparagus sandwiches with canned asparagus?
I don't.
You don't. Well, I do.
I'm not sure I ate them.
You may have
Chances
avoided.
are you didn't, Bill.
You may have avoided them, but I can't believe there was even 18 feet of water to dive in.
Oh, he went that far.
Well, if you say so.
He was an excellent swimmer. He was from Columbus.
Right.
And the first time I ever met him, it was a summer camp called Camp Pratt on the Tom Bigby River.
Okay, I
And
don't.
VP was in charge of swimming and teaching swimming, and he was still in, well, he could have been, he was before he came to Ole Miss.
So he was in high school then.
Yeah, I think he was in high school.
And-
Was he the same VP that we knew when he came to college?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I remember he was one of the ones that put flashlights over his eyes on, and all we could see was these red eyes out in the distance. And he just we were Blayton and Byron and
Little boys.
little boys.
And he
And
was.
Jimmy Ferguson,
Well, Jimmy was his younger brother.
younger brother. Yeah, he was in the cabin with the Oxford boys.
I see.
He was younger than we were.
I see. And of course, he went on to be a band leader. Did he lead the Ole Miss band?
For a while, and then he went, Alabama hired him out from under Ole Miss.
That's what I thought. Then he went to Atlanta and did extremely well. So I hear, have heard.
I didn't follow him.
Well, he and Jim Autry continued to be friends.
I'm sure they were.
And I guess I probably got that from him. But in any way, Estelle did make up. She was a wonderful cook.
She really was.
And she had, well, there's so much to talk about. Is there anything else you want to comment on that has to do with the campus physically, the grounds that you remember?
No, I remember when they opened the university swimming pool.
Oh,
Oh,
that was
yeah.
wonderful.
That was
We
before you
loved
got here.
Well, I can remember the first day I ever went there, and I went there every day that I was home in the summertime
Sure.
from then on.
We all did. It
Loved
was a
it.
blessing.
Really was.
Mm-hmm.
John Fox is the one that took me out there.
Oh, really?
They lived next door to us on Southeast Street.
I know
right
they
there.
did, yeah. And actually, your mother and John are first cousins, aren't they?
Second cousin.
Second cousins. Many connections.
About that pool. I mean, what did you enjoy so much about it?
Well, the fact that we had a swimming pool, a place we could get
That's the
into.
only swimming pool anywhere around.
There was
It was
none.
a good swimming pool.
Oh, it was.
It was a really big, good swimming pool.
Before air conditioning too, right?
Oh, yeah. I
So
mean,
that was the only place you could cool off.
it was about 39 that it opened because I
It
remember
was.
Ken Crosby was president of the student body that year, and he then lived in Washington for many years, and we knew a lot of the same people. And he used to talk about that year when Ole Miss was doing so much to promote itself, and when he was in the student leadership. And he's a good friend of Harold Burson's. They did a lot of investing together, probably the same age or thereabouts. But at any rate, we used to talk about, but for us kids that had access to it, it was like we died and gone to heaven.
It was a social place, too. It was the gathering place.
Yeah. And if you didn't already know how to swim, they offered all instruction there. And I remember Marianne Meir and I taking all that, passing everything, passing the written, passing everything, and they would not give us our junior life-saving badges because we were only 10 years old. Now, why that woman
You
teach-
still remember that, don't you?
Yeah,
it's
still
an issue. I can tell it's an
resent
issue
it.
with
I
you.
resent it. Why that woman teacher couldn't have figured out something to do to satisfy a couple of 10-year-olds is beyond me, but she didn't give that any thought, one way or another. But
They've covered it up now, haven't they?
yeah, they've done away with it, which I thought was a shame, because it was a lovely spot.
It was.
Well, I remember when John Leslie built the city swimming pool because there was no place for black people to swim.
That's right.
Would have been the 70s, right?
About.
Yeah, that was a major leap forward in its day and in its way.
It really was.
It was a different thing. But yeah, that pool, the university pool, was a center of activity for those of us growing up in that era.
You all just began to tell stories about Dean Heffley. It'd be good if you tell us some more.
Do you not have already a lot of Dean Heffley? There are a lot of Dean Heffley stories to go around.
Well, you tell them, Harter, because you seem. I fortunately was not in the middle of having to deal with her day in and day out because I lived at home in a faculty house, so I was not under her jurisdiction. But several faculty children whose parents opted for them to live in the dormitories were under her jurisdiction, and you fit in that category. I managed to avoid that entirely.
That's who Heffley Hall is named after?
Yes.
The story is, and I believe it's true, that she was in love with the soldier that died in the First World War. Very much in love with him, and she was very attractive when she was younger and never wanted to marry after he was killed. And I don't know what she did before she came here as Dean of Women, but I think she was here for a long, long time.
Oh, she was here from the early 30s on.
And she never, as far as I know, changed the way she wore her hair or the way she did anything. She was stuck in time. But she had her ducks in a row, and she knew what was proper, and she had decorum, and her girls were going to not wear anything that makes the boys want to touch. You couldn't wear Angora or cashmere. And even patent leather shoes might reflect something. And you, I mean, this is beyond. And you could not, when you had a class in physical education, which they called it then, over there where Martindale is now, the gym, you could not come back in your shorts. Or if you went over to swim, you had to put on a raincoat. On the sunniest, warmest days, you had to wear your raincoat. And you could not walk on the side of the, as you going past what is now the Trent lot, the old
Past Weir Hall,
Weir
Student
Hall.
Union
Yeah,
it was.
That was the student union, where the football players used to sit out there and whistle at the girls going by, and they'd always choose new girls. They would, target somebody, and you didn't know if it was going to be you that day or what. But you couldn't walk on the other. It was embarrassing. Now you'd think, yay, bring it on. But then it was embarrassing. So you didn't know whether to just keep on going on. And back then, and I can't get up and do it, we had what we call the Ole Miss Shuffle, where girls would walk like doop, 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 doop. So boop, 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 boop. You just go past those boys and think, I'll get past. Because you couldn't go across the street because that's where the boys' dormitories were. And do you remember, it was verboten. You did not walk on the side. And now, to this day, I will look on that side of the street, and the business school's over there, and I think, woo, because it's over there on the wrong side of the street. And when we park back there behind the business school and come up with our stuff and walk in front of the boys' dorms, I think, woo, you know how something can just get entrenched in you? I'm doing, Miss Heffley wouldn't like it.
Well, Miss Heffley had, I remember, 2 nieces, and I think they lived somewhere in Tennessee, but they came to visit her regularly, and I was always enlisted to play with those little girls, and who were very pleasant children, and we had a good time together. And I enjoyed doing that, and she was always extremely nice to me. And I realized, in looking back through my papers, I had this beautiful telegram from her and letter and all sorts of things when I went off to England, and I don't think I ever acknowledged any of it. And when I found it, I was guilt-ridden, of course.
Well, she was a lovely person, and we used to have her over for dinner. Now, when Daddy was Chancellor, here's the way it was with the great big banquet. Great, it was a big table. If there were 13, I had to eat and make 14. If there were 11, I had to eat and make 12. If there were 13 with me, I had to eat in the kitchen. So I got in on some really good conversations, and I remember she was there one time. I don't think it was for her, but she was there. And that's when I learned, and you can't believe this, Bill, but I learned then, if you keep your mouth shut, I really did learn this. If you keep your mouth shut, when you're with people that you really want to learn something from, they'll forget you're there and they'll say things. And I've told my granddaughter, now Emily, just be quiet, and people will forget you're there, and you will really learn things. And I overdid it because we did forget she was there a lot of times and said things she shouldn't have heard.
Well, another thing about Miss Heffley, and whether she had any love life, another story, and some of this is from my mother and her memories and so on, was that she was in love with somebody here, maybe one of the Level boys, of which there were, I think, 9 in that family. It was a huge family. And they did not marry for a variety of reasons, because there was a child who was, what's the word I'm looking for? Somebody help me. Not deformed, but deficient. Gracie is who I'm talking about.
Sure.
Gracie Level, that we all knew and all went to school with. But supposedly there was some fear that if she and this man married, that they might have children with the same birth defects, same problems that Gracie had, whose mother was a level or married to one of the levels. She actually
Well,
was a
Miss
Farley.
I will have to say Miss Heffley really felt responsible for the girls that were under her care, because once she asked me to come in and have a conference with her. Oh, you didn't want that. And I came in, and someone that I knew was going to marry someone that she knew a lot about, and that bothered and concerned her. And I was impressed at that age with somebody, because she was really concerned, and as it worked out, she was right.
Really?
Mm-hmm. The marriage took place, and it shouldn't have, and what she knew was correct. But there wasn't anything I could do, and I never did say anything about it. I just listened to what she had to say, but she was so concerned, and she was truly concerned, because she really did love or care for the people that parents sent their daughters up here.
And several women I know who were in school in the 40s seemed more empathetic to her, say, than girls who came along in the 50s.
And I was in the 50s.
Yeah, and so was I. But
I
I'm
still
thinking of people I know who are older, who clearly were very much in touch with her about a lot of things, particularly Marilyn Howell Bullion, who got together with her to see that these trees were planted going up to Guyton Hall on that part of the campus, which had very little on it at that time, as a memorial to everybody who had died or had injuries. I'm not sure the extent, in the Second World War. It was to honor.
Who was it who was for that? Ms. Heffley?
Miss Heffley promoted that and started it, and I know that Marilyn Howell Bullion was very helpful to her. At some point in the early period during the war years, Marilyn was the first woman to be president of the student body, and William Winter helped to get elected to that and is very proud of it.
Well, was Ms. Heffley the first woman to have a building named after her?
No.
Isom, no.
No.
Ricks
Who would
Hall.
be? Rick, no.
Ricks Hall.
Rick.
Ricks.
Rick was the first.
Ricks was the girls' dormitories, the only ones, I think, were about where the current student union is. And
Is Rick's the one that had the big glass conservatory, that all the glass around the back of it? Which one was that? There was Ward and Rick's.
I don't think Rick's had anything like that, but I could be mistaken.
One of them had glass around the back of
I
it.
don't
You wouldn't know
remember it
that.
either. Now,
No.
Ward was known as the freshman dormitory. All the freshman girls lived in Ward.
Yeah, and Rick's, which Tommy Etheridge misidentifies in the film that I just watched that again last night, and he keeps calling what was Rick's Hall Heffley Hall, but it was not at that
How
time.
do you spell Riggs?
I think it's just R-I-C-K-S.
That's right.
And who was Riggs?
I'd have to go look it up. I don't
She
know.
was a woman, though.
I assume she was.
I think
that
it's
was the first.
yeah, and I think whoever gave the money for the dormitories, who it's named for, if that's a woman, I couldn't say for certain. And I don't know of any other women that have buildings or dormitories named for them.
Except Isom. Is there an Isom building, or is that just the Isom Center?
There was Isom Hall, wasn't there Isom?
That
Yeah.
was girls' dormitory.
Yeah, that's one of the girls' dormitories. But who was
In
Ice?
that center, in that circle?
Mhm.
Isn't it Isom in the circle?
Yeah.
Was there a Sarah Isom? Am I pulling that up from?
No, that's
Sarah
correct. Sarah Isom.
That's what I
Yeah,
thought.
what was she known for?
Well, was she the first faculty member, female faculty member?
I think you're
I
right.
think you're right. I think I've seen her picture. She looks a little subdued.
Now, you all were not in school at the same time? You were all in different times, or were you?
No, we were all in the same time. We just were. I'm a year older than Bill, or maybe am I two?
But
Now,
you grew up together, right? I mean, because you were
Now.
at her 5th birthday party.
Yeah.
and
So you've known each other quite a while.
actually, this is royalty right here that you don't recognize you're in the presence of, because This was, what were you called, Colonel? What were we? I was Miss University High School, and you were, what did
Oh,
they call you?
I don't remember.
And when you were a cheerleader, you had a little megaphone that said, and he was captain of the football team, and it said Uni High, because you couldn't get all that University High School. So when we jumped up and yelled, we yelled, Uni High! And my husband thinks that's the funniest thing he ever heard in his life. And he thought it was so funny, but he framed it, and I have the little thing off your sweater that says Uni High on it. That is pretty silly, isn't it?
What years were you captain of the football team? What years were you playing?
Let's see, I was captain 2 years.
51, 52?
Yeah. I was captain of the football team the year Bobby Holcomb was killed on the football.
That's right.
This is the high school team.
Killed by,
A hit on the head and the helmet came off.
Well, he'd had a previous injury. They
Oh,
later
okay.
found that. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Ed
had a
Morgan
concussion
Ed
before.
Morgan and I were cheerleading, and it happened as close almost as, there. And I remember he jerked funny, and Ed said, Harter, And I said, Ed, I remember just as clearly, and they brought that, everything went quiet, and the next thing you knew, here came an ambulance down on the field. I don't know how that quickly the people that knew what to look
Excuse
for
me.
knew that was
Linda?
a really bad hit.
Oh, okay.
He was a real small boy.
Hey, Fred, I
But
meant
he
to tell
was
Linda she could go.
athletically inclined. I mean, and
Yeah.
everything he did was with top speed, and he hit hard, and he tackled with his head and broke his neck. And I think he died on the football field.
That's what Ed thought.
We all went to Cully Hospital and sat there until Dr. Little, A.H. Little, was attending, came out of the operating room and was shaking his head.
And is it the football field at the current high school named for Bobby Holcomb? I think
That
it,
is correct.
yeah. So that's the history of that little bit.
And his father, he had a scholarship to go to junior college, and it was the first time they were going to, I think I have this right, they were going to go to college, and they were so excited, and he was their pride and joy. And the daddy, I understand, they had to put him in the hospital, sedate, anyway, remember who was going with the little Wilson girl? And she had to plan the funeral. I remember we went out there with her, and the North Oxford Baptist Church was just one building. It was just that small sanctuary. That's all there was to it. It had just been built. And he was one of the first people buried out there. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I never thought I would be planning his funeral and choosing his hymns. I remember saying that. Wearing his football sweater. Some things you just stick in your memory.
Yeah. They do.
well, tell us about the stores on the square. Help us remember what was on the square when you all were growing up.
Well, there weren't any bars for starters.
Or law firms.
Well, there were
Or what'd you say, Will?
Law firms. It's either law firms or bars up there now, isn't it?
Well, my grandfather had a store up there on the square. It was a furnishing business where he would loan people.
Furniture?
No, it was not a furniture store. It was a furnishing business where he furnished farmers money and
Credit.
and some. He kept coffee and sugar and the staples of life in there.
Where was that, Bill?
Right next door to the Golden Eagle, the Golden
Golden Rule.
Rule, between
Golden-
News Drugstore and Golden Rule. I
over
used
there.
to work
where-
there on Saturday.
I didn't know that.
There was it's over where Square Books Extra is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where I remember it being.
That's exactly where it was.
And furnishing is an old term that was used at that time for what his grandfather's store did, because every small town would have one or more people or businesses who were in position to furnish goods and loan money and do whatever was needed for people to make their crops and make a profit, and that's what the businesses
And my
about?
daddy was a cotton buyer in that store. That's the first thing he did in life. He bought cotton, and he'd take the sample and he'd look at the sample, and this middling cotton had some trash in it, but not a whole lot of trash. Good middling cotton was hand picked all the time, and it was bright. It had a color to it that was brightness. And then strict low was a grade below middling. But he knew all that and then went to school for it.
Fair to middling. I remember that grade.
Yeah, I remember fair, but I don't recall how it fell in the order.
Yeah. Well, didn't you all have a gin as well?
Daddy bought the gin in 1936.
I see. So he had that fairly early on.
Yeah.
And was that down where the gin restaurant was?
No, this was another gin where the warehouse restaurant used to be. The gin was just west of the warehouse restaurant.
Behind Nelson's back, down the hill there. And do you remember Ms. Winters?
Sure.
Ms. Winters' store was what? Was where? Where is Hinton and along about there, maybe?
No, Hinton, that was Herndon's grocery store.
Okay, so it was on back down toward the square, wasn't it, Ms. Winters?
Yes.
I don't remember hers.
Ms. Winters sold a little bit of everything, but right in the middle of it, she had a grill. And she made the best hot dogs and hamburgers.
Oh,
and
I
you
thought-
walked in, and the grease in the wintertime was mixed in with the fog and everything from the heat. And it smelled wonderful, because you know old grease just smells wonderful. And do you remember that? You walk in and you just want everything she's cooking, you want it. She
Is she-
fixed hot dogs. She fixed hot dogs. She split them and she put them out on that grill, and then she put them in a hamburger bun with chopped up onions and pickles. Oh, it's the only way I've ever liked
You
it.
sure it's not Miss Cooks? That's who I remember.
It's Miss Winters, wasn't it?
It was Miss Winters, yes.
Uh-huh.
In that location, Miss Cooks was down on Jackson Avenue.
That's
Right.
right. This is Miss Winters right there. I don't know how long she was there, but I remember. And above Miss Winters, you'd like this, Will. Above Miss Winters, you don't think about this except for Tricia would, is where Miss Higdon made all your formals for all your formals. Remember? You'd just go to the fabric store and you'd pick out your taffeta and your wonderful stuff and your tulle and take it up to Miss, and everybody was going to be different. You didn't want anything like anybody else's.
Right.
You'd die. With the big hoops.
Yep.
Miss Higdon. And you'd have to get up there, and of course the skirts were so huge that it would take her forever to hem your skirt up, and you'd just about faint before she got through from standing. Now turn, now honey turn, and she'd gossip and she'd tell you everything she knew from the people that came there before you.
If there were a source of gossip, it was the
Miss
seamstresses.
Uh-huh. Miss Higdon
Because
was
I went to
good.
Mrs. Roberts, but it was the same drill, basically the same drill.
And that was
Exactly.
on that side of the square. And then we had grocery stores stuck around. We had Fudge's Grocery.
Where was that?
Where was Fudge's Grocery?
It was on South Lamar.
Go just right down.
City Grocery.
City Grocery.
Yeah, that was the first freezer in town. First automatic where you could walk into a freezer. And they sold places that you could store your food and had a lock on it inside the freezer. And in the summertime, I wouldn't go in there because I was barefooted. And my mother would have to go do everything, and I'd stand outside because the floor was
cold.
frozen.
And we used to walk from the barefoot. I'd pick up Jerry, and we'd pick up Ann, and we'd walk to town barefoot.
You've told me that, and I don't ever go into town
Yeah,
barefoot.
we'd walk all around town barefoot
Oh,
because
yeah.
it was a little bitty town. I mean, that's what made me think of you going in the store barefoot. I'm sure you were barefoot.
Yeah, I was barefoot.
As we walked around barefoot.
And there was
Yeah.
Nelson's on the square.
Oh, yeah.
And what was where the city hall is now? What was that?
That's the
office.
post
Post
office.
office.
That's federal
That-
building.
Federal building.
It had been built as a federal building, I think in the 1870s when Oxford was rebuilt, but I may be wrong on that date. But it'd been built early on.
Victorian.
Yeah, very
And
Victorian.
what was between Nelson's and that hall and that building. They've got a little building there now.
Yeah.
But there was
There's a
Different
vacant lot
things.
there.
Was it vacant?
Yeah, but it was owned by the federal government at the time.
Uh-huh. And then Ruth's store for a long time, a ladies' store was on the other side of Nelson's, which Nelson's hadn't expanded clear to the corner. So this little store in the Intruder in the Dust, those pictures you see, is a Ruth's store is on the corner.
Mm-hmm.
Ruth's was here and in Columbus, Mississippi, and I don't know where else.
I know.
What did they sell?
women's clothes.
And it was owned by Seymour Bernstein.
Didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
And who is Seymour Bernstein?
He was the owner of these two stores I just talked about.
Ruth's store. Now you don't. I mean, ask us anything, we'll tell you.
We just
Among
make.
the three of us, we've got it all together.
Oh, I
Seymour
know.
Bernstein used to date the son of the owner of Ruth. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
see,
who is he beyond that?
we don't know.
Now,
He owns Ruth's stores, that's all we know. And Miss Edna Berry. Now you come on down, Miss Edna Berry's was down, on the south side of the square. There's Square Books, and then there's always been the bank. The bank's always
It was
been there.
beyond Gathright Reed's.
Gathright Reed's on down. There's Morgan's store, you Mount Morgan's appliance store, and that was a general hangout place.
he
Right.
was on the board of trustees when you were at Ole Miss.
Can I tell the story about?
Excuse me.
Can I tell the story about Ross Barnett? I think I've told you this before. Did I tell you the story about Ross Barnett? And they were in the elevator in the
It's
federal
funny.
building.
Tell
Did
it
I tell
again.
you?
Tell it again.
I guess you've heard this story. I don't know. Well, Daddy was in the elevator, and the board of trustees and the governor, and of course, Shine Morgan. And they had just been told that they would either accept James Meredith or go to jail, which Daddy had been telling them all the time, this is what's going to happen. And all the time the board, Shine had been saying, Governor, I'm with you all the way, because the governor said never, 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 and I'm with you all the way. And Shine just capitulated. And in the elevator, the governor said, Shine, you told me you were with me all the way. And Shine said, I lied. I just love it.
I lied.
He just as quick thinking me said, I lied.
Will Hickman was the one that originated that story.
Is that
Oh,
right?
is it?
Well, he was there.
He was there at the meeting.
Yeah, so was Daddy. Daddy told me that story. I didn't
You
know
know who Will Hickman was? Yeah, okay.
So, but anyway, so then Shine Morgan store, and then Gathright Reed. Well, the point I'm getting to, and then of course there was Denton's Furniture and on down. And my first job was working at Hume's store. Hume's had on the corner where the taco fish place is now. There was Hume's women's store, shoe store, and Hume's men's store, right?
Yeah, that's
and my
right.
first job was wrapping Christmas presents, and I've never been any good at it. But it was so much fun because we listened to the Christmas music, and college boys worked there, and it was just fun. It was fun. I got a little Social Security card. Wasn't that neat? For doing nothing at all and getting paid in a Social
Howard
Security
Bishop
card.
worked there,
Yes, he did.
and so did Lee Duddleston.
Lee Duddleston.
Lee
and Woodard. Joe Woodard.
Joe Woodard.
Joe Woodard worked there.
Joe and Lee used to walk to our house. Why I didn't get in the car and go get them, I don't know. Saturday night, when they would get off from Hume's, exhausted, full of funny stories, stretch out in front of the fireplace. I don't remember that anybody offered them anything to drink. Maybe so, maybe not. This was not really a drinking family at all. But they would come in with more stories, and Joe was more of the storyteller.
Wonderful. I love Joe.
And he said, this woman looked in there, a black woman, and said to him, Miss Joe, how much those shoes cost in the window? And he told her they were $29.95. She said, Lord, I ought to have had my head sent to Jackson for ever coming in this place. Now, if you don't think that's funny, you said the dog's head, if he was suspected of having rabies, off to be tested, and that was her reference. We all just broke up when we thought about it, but it was one story after another like that, and
then I know you know Lyric Theater. The Lyric Theater, if you had a date with somebody that was really, that was a real date, you went to the Lyric Theater. Even though there were rats and mice and, squishy floor, you went to the Lyric, because they had the better movies.
mm-hmm.
Your B-grade cowboy movies were down at the Ritz. And was there a difference in price, Bill?
I don't think
Between
so.
I
the
don't
two.
think so.
But you
I
do
don't
know
think
what
so.
I'm talking about.
Oh,
Sure.
yeah.
We had 2 classes of movie theaters. The Ritz, where the Ritz apartments are now, was the Ritz movie theater. And they both smell like popcorn. But the mayor, Mayor Williams, had the lyric. And he sat in the little and took your little tickets when you came in and talked to you with his little high voice and sent you on back to the movie.
And mice would run across your feet?
Well, no, but we knew they were in there. Why do we know? Did our parents tell us mice were in there? What? Don't let the rats get
Well,
you or
we
something?
used to smoke in the thing too. They had wooden
Yes,
floor-
you did. Yes, you did.
I did.
We had a friend, I won't tell his name, but we had a friend that would always bum cigarettes off of Bill and say, and I'll just need a few, and Bill, and he'd go away from Bill with one behind his ear. You remember that? Bill used to get so angry because he didn't buy his own, but he'd take one and put one behind his ear for a spare.
I don't remember that. But it,
Now, Will Hickman came into town about when?
When he
went-
graduated from Millsaps.
And he moved up here.
Uh-huh. And went to law school. And when he, after he graduated from law school, Bob Smallwood asked him to be a partner. Bob had an established law practice.
About what year would that have been?
I'm gonna say it's 1949 or 50.
I
Does
wouldn't.
that sound about right?
Yeah, but I don't really know. I just don't remember Will Hickman during that period. I just know he was.
You want to get that for you?
I know he was older than we are, but perhaps not all that much. But I just didn't remember him.
He really built power, political power.
He inherited. Bob Smallwood was a politically
Oh, is
astute.
that right?
Oh yeah.
So it wasn't just the cabin out north of town.
He didn't own it then. When he went in the law firm with Bob Smallwood.
And did Smallwood own the cabin?
No. Will bought that place where the cabin is now
Yeah.
with 2 partners, John Henry Mansell, whose daddy had the Ford agency here, and Sonny Hemphill.
John
The 3
Hen-
of them.
John Henry's about. Well, I remember being in school with John Henry.
Yeah,
That's
because
Keith
he's
Mansell's
about your
dad,
age,
Keith
wasn't he?
Mansell's
Yeah, I think
dad.
he's about my age, maybe a year older.
But then Will bought the other 2 partners out, John Henry and Sonny Hemphill. And then that's when he added on to the cabin, made it a real nice place.
They talk about how he was the godfather of Mississippi down to Highway 82. That he had a lot of political power. Will Hickman. One time I went over to Jamie Witten's house in Charleston after he'd won an election, and you had Kosser, the lake, the pond is named after.
George Payne.
Yeah,
George
and
Kosser.
all sorts of folk were there from that region, and they were all talking, and then Will Hickman comes, and Jamie Witten goes right to him, and he takes him out, and they disappear for an hour and a half. So it was very clear who helped him keep getting elected. And he basically, I think, he'd stock that cabin with liquor and have card games out there all weekend. And I was told he'd try to lose to everybody a little bit and get them loaded. And he did that with the county board of supervisors and with the city council.
Oh yeah.
And that's how he just gained enormous influence.
That's true. Very powerful. I
And-
thought he might run for governor at one time, but he had no desire to run for anything.
You like to be
course.
behind the scenes.
Exactly right. Of course, he was a lawyer for the the board of supervisors for the county, and is also the lawyer for back Oxford.
I don't remember.
It had to be the back Oxford.
I mean, people keep forgetting I was gone for 50 years.
Yeah.
A lot.
And he was a big Democrat. He was
Oh, I
the
know
Democrat of North Mississippi,
Mm-hmm.
besides you.
No.
Well, not quite. But I knew that he and Mr. Whitten were close, and I had the feeling that Mr. Whitten owned a lot of property in Oxford because Will had helped him
Right.
purchase and take advantage of whatever came along. And I never knew what all he owned or what the outcome of any of that was. But
See, he owned Shine Morgan's business building.
oh,
Mhm, he owned the building.
who Jamie did?
Uh-huh.
Well, that doesn't surprise me either when I think about it.
No, Will used to look after it for
I see.
him.
See, do you remember the other night that I told you that when I moved here, it wasn't long after Bill started telling me that what we needed in Mississippi was a two-party system. And now we were like 15, 16 years old, and I listened to what he said, and I said, this is odd. I don't know anybody else my age that's really so passionate about having a two-party system.
Or even knew what it was.
Mm-hmm. But I listened to what you said. I listened to a lot of things you said. It's pretty smart. And I came down here from the bluegrass, and I thought, what have I walked into this place? And he took me to some beautiful farmland and showed me, you know, out there on the land that you own along the river,
Mm-hmm.
the Yachna River bottom, and some beautiful land, and out to we went all through the Hot Springs National Forest, and said, see, it's really better than you thought, because all the way down here I had seen what I'd never seen before, and because we hadn't dealt with erosion at that time, and you know, you look at that and just was posed against the bluegrass, and it was just
And
not a good
kudzu.
thing. That we didn't have kudzu then. Kudzu's is
Well, it
much
came
better.
later.
Yes, at this time there wasn't anything but washed out red, horrible dirt and railroad tracks.
And
It
I
was
do,
pretty
I
depressing.
do remember that vividly in my mind of what it was like
It
at
was
that
pretty
point.
Anybody like a Coke or anything?
Want Coke or some water or something?
No, thank you.
Kind of you to ask. Thank you. I don't believe so.
Mickey?
Okay.
Well, so now Ed Morgan was a character.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and Shine was his father.
So tell some stories about both Shine and Ed Morgan.
I can't repeat any of his stories.
Not in front of women.
Not in front of the light company, no.
Well, I do know one because we used to double date with them a lot, and I know one time my friend Catherine said that Ed came home and he went to turn the light on, and his daddy had gotten on the floor and had his hand on the light switch, so that when Ed put his hand on the light switch, there was already a hand there. Nearly scared him to death. Shine was always doing things,
Oh, yeah.
playing tricks on.
Well, I was told Ed Morgan there are two things that really made him nervous, was going to Ole Miss football games
He threw up.
all the time. He always threw up.
Get away from him.
And he
Well, the
also-
first game he did was the Ole Miss Maryland
Game. I was there.
I know it.
And he put a program up over the stuff that,
That's exactly right.
and somebody came down the stairs and stepped on it.
Listen, I was there. We're not going to go over there. We're not going to do that.
And the other thing, I heard that he got really nervous the night he got married and spent the night in the bathroom.
I didn't hear that.
I don't know if that's true, but I've heard that. I figure his wife has to be at the level of
She's
sainthood.
wonderful. Oh, she's wonderful.
She's a,
And, well, I'll tell you something. This is the funniest thing to me. Well, you know, some people, when they get a little, they get kind of mean. He got sweeter and sweeter. Now, you knew him, but he, you know, he's basically a really kind, sweet. He just got, he loved everybody. Everybody loved him. And one night, Paul, afternoon, it was a night game. Our son, Paul, wanted us to enter, you know, Wise. What's the guy's name? Last name Wise. You know him. He's from up there. He was at the White House, and he came by, stopped by Richmond, and then he's down here now. Anyway, he wanted us to entertain. Last name Wise, I'll think of it. He wanted us to entertain him, so we said, "Oh, fine." And so we spent the night. We went to the ball game, and introduced him all around. Well, he and Howard and Ed didn't want to leave the Grove. They loved the Grove. What's his name was? I'll think of it in a minute.
Doesn't sound right.
Been to anything like that. This Wise had not been to anything like that, so he did not want to leave. And Ed and Howard were just having a good time, so they just didn't want to leave either. And we were ready to pack up. Everybody's packed up and gone. The tents are gone. We're ready to go, and they just kept staying. Finally, we got time to read. Linda left, Jerry left. Everybody's leaving. So we finally get ready to. Bob's driving. It's about 11:30, 11:45, and it says, "Oh, Bob. See, now Howard has just gotten. Now listen, that is where Howard do all this, and he loves us. He would love for us to come and see him. Stop by there. Let's just go in and see him." And Bob just kept driving, and Bob going because whatever name Wise wanted to see the rest of the town, so we rode down there by B. Elliott's, William Lewis. Oh, now this is where William Lewis is, and he loves us. He would love to see us. Let's go in and see Will. And everywhere we'd go by somebody he knew. Now this is just Ed. Oh, and so every now and then, Bob and I will say, we just love them. They just love us. Can't you just hear him? And can't you just hear Miss Nanny saying the same thing?
Mm-hmm.
His mama would talk like that. Just love them.
Explain to me who Ed Mitchell is.
You who?
Ed Morgan.
Ed Morgan.
That on the
He
furniture.
used to own a furniture store on the square,
Okay.
and he'd have a big Christmas party every year, and he would show porno movies.
I had heard that.
and people get drunk, and there'd be little kids running around. I mean, he's just a character. It just, in a town like this, he got because of Willie Morris, TV Guide did a story on him and his business, and he had all these televisions on, and they all had different channels. So the TV Guide had it, and the cable company ran an ad when they had the story in TV Guide. And then because of that, no, I know what it was. They ran the story in TV Guide, and then the cable company thought, well, this would be a good guy to endorse our cable company, and so they checked to see if he was a client, and he was stealing the cable from the building next door. And so they're writing a story on him in TV Guide, exposed him, and he had to pay from then on.
See, now we didn't hear that. Did you hear that? I've never heard that story.
I never have, no.
Well,
I heard it from Willie Morris. That's who, he was very Willie Morris loved Ed Morgan because he was so funny.
Well, Ed got into that whole social thing about, with all the TVs and all his friends coming. He was a very social people person. And business just sort of got in his way. And you'd come in there because when we moved back here, I really wanted to do business with Ed. He just didn't want to sell anything. You just have to knock him in the head to get to buy something.
Well, and it wasn't just a once-a-year party that he had. Basically, it was pretty much every day. No, it was pretty much
all day long.
every day. Everybody that wanted to hang
If
out.
Linda was there, you'd go back to the books and you'd say, Linda, I really, really want this bed, or I really want this refrigerator, and I want to buy it from you. I don't want to go out to wherever else. I want to buy it from you. And please, can I give you my money now? And go back and let her put it in the book, because Ed just didn't want to fool with it because he's too busy out there watching.
You couldn't have businesses like that today with Walmart and all these
No,
other big.
well, and that's what closed Ed down. Exactly that
right.
kind of
When did he
competition.
close down? I must have been gone from town, I think.
You were. Mm-hmm.
I don't remember.
In the 90s sometime, right?
Yeah.
And what, he died?
It was when I was in Washington. It was the early 90s.
Yeah.
But it was a sort of a continuing party there, as I understand it, and it never did
Oh, it was.
And
let
there was
up.
another furniture store just down the way where Waltz. or
Denton's.
Yeah.
Benny Denton. And his daughter has come back, and she owns that property. She has a neat little place I've never been in. You get in from the side street in the back there.
So, well, anyway, I think the Denton family is, they're tied up with several people. They've been owners around here of businesses for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But now back on the square, here's the thing that I loved when I came here, having always lived in the city. You could get anything brought to your house. And by the way, when you're coming, stop by something and bring me something else too. You know, I mean, people were just really nice about, isn't that right? You could get anything delivered. You could get things from Grathright Reed, and he had a little stock of books back there, and bring me something to read too. I understand people got that.
My daddy used to order his whiskey from a fellow in Harmontown that would deliver a case of liquor from Harmontown over here.
Like I say, they were delivered anything you wanted. They
Well,
delivered
you don't know
it
where
right
he
to
got
your
it.
door.
No.
No.
I'm trying to think of his name.
Probably went to Tennessee to buy it.
Well, I think he had it stored in Harmontown.
Oh, he did?
See, that was in Lafayette County, but no police protection from Lafayette County.
Well, they were up there just in their own little world.
That's exactly right.
And another thing that may have preceded you, but you may remember this, we had one fire truck, and here's what I loved: when the fire siren, you know, if you had time, you could run to the square and watch the fire truck go round and around until all the volunteer firemen that worked around the square jumped on. Now, meanwhile, something's burning, but we're clanging the bell and ringing the thing.
I tell you,
and that was a real happening, wasn't it, Bill? Remember that?
Oh, sure.
Jim
I was
Shiver.
a member of the fire department.
Jim
I
Shiver
was a
thought
captain
that.
of
Yeah.
the fire department.
There you go.
Yeah.
Jim Shiver thought that was the funniest thing he had ever seen in his life, having grown up in Atlanta when he first experienced Oxford. And the one fire truck, that's all there was. And it was very much a social thing at that time to be a fireman. It was not a hired thing. It was, you pretty much had to own a business to qualify. And the truck, as you said, would go round and round until it had gathered up everybody, however long that took. And then they go find the fire, finally, I guess. And
With
of course,
everybody following their cars.
and
It
then
was happening.
we should have a whole session sometime on the fire department, the fire trucks, the fire truck that was forever out of gas as people kept borrowing it, and the happenings that related to the fire department, because Mill Murray has a lot of funny stories about that, and so does Chester McClarty, who tells about his family home on Jefferson being on fire, and it took them a long time to realize it because it was in the walls. And by the time they did realize it and got the fire truck, which then sat at the end of Ruth's store in a little shed, it didn't have any gas left in it. They had to push it to Jefferson Street, which was not too far to get it there. And I don't know what they did for power after they got there, but and then the Mill Murray story was that one of the fire trucks burned.
That's right.
And it was on April Fool's Day, and her father came home telling that it burned, and nobody would believe him. So it has an interesting history.
Now, the square was two-way until '73, I think.
Well, I don't know. You could. It was two-way for a long time. I don't know when it changed.
And were the parking places like they are right now?
I think.
Because that's awful narrow to have two-way traffic. It had to be wider than, you've got now these parking places where you park this way and you park that way. You probably just could park on the outside.
I think you could just park on the outside. I do. Don't you think? I think so. Do you think?
I don't really
remember.
I remember you could double park on the square. You just park behind somebody that's already parked there. Of course, when they came to get out, you had to let them out.
And we had parking meters, and it didn't work, so they had to come and take them out. Nobody paid. It was just sort of a, let's just don't pay. Nobody paid, so they had to take the parking meters.
Well, also, though, I've heard people quit shopping here because they didn't want to have to pay, and so they would go elsewhere, and that was a great motivation to close the things down.
Just took it up to the house.
Be done with it.
Okay, Bill. What else have we? What have we not covered?
It was mostly a farm community when you first grew up.
Right.
Where were there stables in town? Were there any stables in town?
Yeah, my grandfather had a barn right back of his house, and that was where I kept the horse.
And have you already said on tape where your house was?
Right.
Where my grandfather's house?
No, you
Your
didn't.
house.
Yeah. I lived in my daddy built a house at the end of this street on the right-hand side down there. Just been redone. Last house on the right.
And your granddaddy's house was?
On,
South 11?
what's her name?
Betty Jean
Knox Gary. Knox
Gary's
Gary's
wife,
wife.
Betty Jean Gary.
Lives in it now.
It has a huge front. It's on South 11th and has a huge front yard, which at one time, Mother Annie let us play tennis down there. She had a little tennis court. But it's always been used for kids to play.
Mm-hmm.
And kids are playing in it right now. If you go down there right now today, kids are playing in that front yard. That was Mother Annie when we knew it. That was his
And
granddad.
it was where the Faulkners lived when they were boys.
Yeah.
Little boys.
And my grandfather and William Faulkner's father swapped houses.
Yeah, tell us that story. That's an interesting bit.
And I don't know where my grandfather's house was on South Lamar, because it was torn down long before I was born. But it was somewhere south of the Four Corners, where there used to be 4 service stations. Now we just call it the Four Corners
Abner's and
stoplight.
Regions.
But it's south of there. And I don't know what side of the street it was on. Don't remember. But my granddaddy, they got together and said, I like your house and I like yours. And they just swapped. And with it came the mule pasture that joined the university. And the university now owns it. And that's where we played all through those woods when I was young. It was a wonderful place to be raised.
You could back then walk from your house through the woods to the high school,
Oh, yeah.
which is now the music school.
Mm-hmm.
But you could walk through those woods, and they would cut through this woods. Not now when you think of it, because you're thinking about going around, you think, oh, it was just a hop skip through the woods.
You can still walk through those
You
woods.
can.
Well,
Bailey's Woods.
Yeah.
It's not, the paths probably aren't as clear as they were then, because that's the way everybody used to go just from over in that end of town, isn't it?
It's debatable whether Bailey's Woods comes up to where my granddad's barn was. And a lot of people call that Bailey's Woods, but it's not. Bailey's Woods was farther
South.
than that.
And where his barn was would be, you'd end up going behind Ann Roy's house.
Well, actually, alongside of
Long-
Ann Roy. You still be in the mule pasture just south of Ann Roy's house, and there was a board fence there one time. And my granddaddy built the ditch is deep, the storm sewer ditch
Right,
that feeds the south. This is part of it is right over here,
right, behind
and
this.
part of it comes down Lincoln Avenue.
Right.
And I lost my train of thought.
And Isom and Mayetta lived in your backyard.
Sure did.
And the house is still there, isn't it? Or they tear it
I
down?
think they tore it down.
These were your parents' helpers, servants.
That's right. Leota was a bar, the daughter of Molly Barr.
Okay, it all ties together.
James Barr, her brother, fought all the way through Europe in World War II. Went to work for the ice plant after he got out for Dan Roy. when he owned the ice plant.
Okay.
And he just died about, 2 or 3 years ago.
And what's his name again?
James Barr.
James Barr.
And so Molly Barr, and then Rachel that raised Ann right across the
That
street
was another daughter.
was another daughter,
Yeah.
and all of them were Molly Barrs. You know, I've been up to where the old homestead was,
Oh,
where the
yeah.
Barrs lived, because Rachel.
There's still
was,
some live up there.
Rachel was an institution. I love Rachel. And
She
Rachel,
made us all behave, I tell
Rachel
you.
did, and Rachel told us all about you're a bad little boy. When you got after Ann, you were a bad little boy. And then Willie B, that worked for us, used to go over and see Iceman Mayetta when he'd get off work a lot of times.
Yeah, now they were related somehow. Isom and
And
Willie B were related.
Well, Bill, when we were Willie B's caregivers at the end of his life, and he told me a lot of things, and I realized that when he went over to talk to Iceman Mayetta, they talked about us.
That had not occurred to
It never
you.
occurred to me, and they kept up with us, where we went, what we did, who we married, the children we had. They were really involved. And I guess the last of that, Rachel died before Willie B, didn't she? Or did she? I think
She did. You talking about his wife?
I'm talking about
Louise was his wife.
Louise. I'm talking about Rachel Barr, Rachel McGee. She was, but she was Ann's surrogate mother. Really, to tell you the truth, practically raised Ann. Ann, I love Rachel.
Well, the hierarchy of all these people that are related to one another within the black community, I'm sure extends a lot farther than we're able to extend it because we don't know enough of the people well enough. Now, of course, Willie B. Had been trying within the Heritage Foundation to hold on to his heritage because we've got more about him than we have on practically anyone else.
And I have him on tape, by the way.
Yeah, and so we will.
Done a visual about him.
He will figure heavily in what's put together for this new center, the Belfry Center, let's call it. His history, and of course his history also figures very heavily in the Second Baptist Church, where he was extremely active in his day. So the more we know of these things, the more it all fits.
Well, there was sort of royalty in Oxford. There was just about everybody, and then there was Faulkner and your granddaddy, I assume. And who else would be in that little group of people that hung out together and went to each other's house?
Gosh,
The Littles.
the what?
The Littles. Hunter's
Yeah, oh yeah,
parents.
Dr. Little.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And have you got a picture of the hunt breakfast?
I don't, but we will certainly have one next time around.
The Littles
And-
and the Morgans and the Evans and the Browns and the
But I would.
Well,
Well, Jim Silver was in,
and
an upper echelon group at one time.
He was, and I didn't want to lead off, but you and I have talked about this years ago, and that little clique of people that enjoyed one another's company also, in fact, enjoyed having a little drink now and then, which sort of separated them from a lot of other people in town. And if it didn't, they certainly intended for it to. That was where they were headed.
And would you say that Faulkner, from the time he was real young, had a drinking problem?
Yeah, I don't know. See, he was.
Dean Wells, in her book, particularly when she must have been about a teenager, talked about what seemed like a pretty serious problem.
Harter told some good stories about that.
did I on that?
Yeah,
I did.
yeah, about going over to spend the night with Jill. And
Well, I did, didn't I?
Yeah.
And see, yes, so I would say it was significant, but I didn't know it. Thank you for reminding me. Because I think it was not anything that I told that people didn't know.
Yeah, I
Bill,
think
what
everybody knows.
Bill, what I said was, and see, when I came here, I guess he had a problem then, and I didn't know it. We didn't know it because we were part of the non-drinking group, and so we weren't into that. We didn't, I guess, identify it. And one of the first things I said when Mother said, "Well, what's Jill's father like?" Because she knew he was a writer, and I said, "Well, I don't know. He's a little different. He seems to be always at home. Maybe he works at home. I know he goes all around the house in cutoffs and drinks a lot of ginger ale. Because he always had ginger ale in his hand,
Or
day
something.
and night. And then when I was invited over by Jill to spend the night, I understood later that some of the people who had been going over there to spend the night with her when she was needing somebody to spend the night with her didn't feel comfortable doing that. And I didn't know the difference. I didn't know there's anything going on.
I'm not sure I really did either, because there was nothing in particular to make you aware of it.
I think they just stayed back. I didn't see them. I don't ever remember seeing them out. I remember when I went down there was just Jill and there wasn't any to spend the night.
No. I remember many dinner parties with him and have many funny stories about those, and he could not have been a more agreeable and charming host. You
True.
would never
I
have
thought
Exactly
that when
right.
I went.
Yeah,
There wasn't anybody there but the
He
two
was a
of us.
binge drinker,
After his work was done on a book or something.
or after he completed the book, maybe.
Yeah.
I knew him quite well because Jill and I were the same age, and I could walk from my house to their house.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time down there, riding horses with Jill and working on the boat with Mr. Bill. And I never saw him drunk.
I never did either. But the
No,
thing
I
I'm
didn't
saying
either.
is I didn't sing. At those times that I was down there, I just didn't sing. I
Did
didn't
you-
sing.
No, he would stay at home and stay drunk for 2 or 3 weeks at
Yeah.
a time.
And I think that's when she needed somebody down there. That's what I assume now because I never saw him. I'm like Elizabeth. When I did see him, he was a perfect gentleman.
Did people in town know that he was as much of a genius?
No,
No.
most people had no idea, none.
But they read his books, but they
No.
very few read his books.
No, very few read his books, and they wouldn't have understood them if they read them. I don't think they would have appreciated them. He was in a world that was not all that connected with this community, although his source that he was drawing from as he created characters and situations were all drawn from within this community.
Yeah.
And perhaps people didn't want to recognize that, but I don't think they read enough of him to know that they would have recognized it.
The New York Times, I think either 2 or 3 weeks ago, had an article in the magazine section or the book review section about that voted by a group of experts. Absalom was considered the best book in 100 years, and that it basically was about race in the South, and that it gave a terrific perspective on that, and it talked about the layers in the book that you could read. You could read it at one level, or you could read it at a second level, and it talked about the genius of the man that would stack these words together that you were told in school you never stack adjectives together, and he would do it, and it would create a whole different reality depending upon how intelligent you were at figuring out what he was saying. And it seems to me that a community wouldn't be able to recognize that while someone was around.
No, and they wouldn't be able to recognize it, I don't think, either, without a little guidance from people who understood and were interested enough to be paying attention. And if that element was here, I sure did get word.
Well, and the energy it takes to create something like that, it has to be exhausting. And I would think that that's why he turned to booze at the end of projects. because it had to sort of purge his system so he could get ready for the next one. And he had to be writing all the time because he had money problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
How late did his money problem, when did his money problems end, or did they never end?
Oh, no. No, when he got the Nobel Prize, his money problems were over with.
1950.
Yeah.
That's true.
But
It was.
He only lived 12 more years.
Yeah.
And he was 62 when he died.
Mm-hmm.
So he's 50 years, he had financial troubles till he was 50 years old.
Yep,
Mm-hmm.
that's right.
You know,
But
I
the
think-
drinking, and I have read it. I refer back. It's usually Malcolm's little book, but that people that knew him and were close to him would see this coming on, and they knew it would go on for a period of weeks. I think for those that were familiar with it, it perhaps became quite predictable.
Let me ask you, when I first came to Oxford, somebody said to me that they would be invited by Jill or Ms. Estelle to the Faulkner home for dinner. And Faulkner would stay upstairs while everybody else ate. Did you ever see that?
I didn't.
He would always be at the dinner table.
No question, and in charge of the whole thing. And I mean,
Funny.
yeah, oh, funny. And funny even if he didn't mean to be funny. Even if he had nothing to do with it. One of my little stories, you remember, the houseboy, Norfleet.
Oh yes, wonderful.
Norfleet was one of the houseboys. When we say houseboys, that's in this, they were serving in the dining room primarily. The meal was always very formally presented. That's the way Estelle wanted it.
Mm-hmm.
These young men were all, I think, sons of people who cooked in the kitchen and worked in the kitchen, and so they were shanghaied into this role.
About how old would they be?
16, something like
Tall. He was tall.
that. He's very tall, and very funny without meaning to be. But I tried. Huh?
Well, Estelle was in that group too now.
How do you?
Jill's black person mate.
Yeah,
You remember Estelle, don't you?
I do.
You remember.
Right. Well, anyway, Norfleet was serving and dithering behind Mr. Faulkner, trying to get him to take a roll off of the plate, and he couldn't quite figure out what to do because Faulkner wouldn't pay any attention to him. And I was seated, I think not next to Mr. Faulkner, but maybe the next place. I think Estelle was at the other end of the table and her vision was not good, and I doubt she saw any of this because no words were exchanged. But after he dithered a while, Norfleet thought, well, can't stay here forever, and he put his hand over all the rolls but one and tipped that off onto Faulkner's plate, and I thought it was about the funniest thing I'd ever seen. I said,
Norfleet was a hoot. He really was.
How would you spell his name?
Nor,
Fleet.
yeah. And I've been searching for his last name, have not found it. I understand he was a good football player and that Mr. Faulkner and Malcolm used to go see him play. I've also heard that Faulkner helped him go to college and get an education. But I have not been able to track this man down if he's still living. But
Mrs. Murray always know that.
well, she might. And then there was another houseboy after him that I didn't know, but my brother did, who would go home with Malcolm when he thought Malcolm probably should not go from the laboratory where they worked for Arthur Guyton because there's entirely too much alcohol available that he thought Malcolm probably took advantage of. And so anyway, they'd get down there, and here's this young man, a different one, barefoot. He had no shoes. Had the white jacket on, though a little smudged and dirty. Drinks always came on a silver tray. Usually this time, and I think Estelle and Jill were gone with just Malcolm and Mr. Faulkner there, just men. So nobody had on many clothes, and they're out there in the yard sitting under a tree, and he's telling this endless story, and my brother goes home and has supper with our mother. And we live on the other end of town, end of Fraternity Row. He comes back, and Bill Faulkner's still talking.
Tell the story.
He had never finished. So, at any rate, he created his own world, and he lived in it, and he, I think, thrived on it. It was both his living, and it was where his mind was, too, when you think about it a little bit, more than in the reality of Oxford. I'd never thought about that so much till right now, but I think there was something to that.
Really good.
Especially when the year before our high school speaker had been Governor Barnett.
Well, maybe that had something to do with it.
I've got to make a phone call. Y'all
That could
keep
have
talking.
something to
Y'all
do with
keep
it.
talking.
Well, I've got one other set of things I want to talk about, but I'll wait till Will gets back.
Go start, and then I'll be in. Because this might take a while.
Well, in any case, I too went back when the material has just come out. I reread his graduation remarks, found them very appropriate, very to the point. At the same time, I reread his Nobel presentation and whatever else was in there. And I realized in that period of history, he seems to me to have been forming or creating, he had created the nucleus of a set of beliefs that would take him through the rest of his life. And they were very optimistic beliefs, and he would talk that way, saying to us, if all his dinner guests turned out to be teenagers, so be it. He talked to them and said, you know, the world is yours. You need to plan to get busy and do what you can to improve it, in fact, all that was going on that was difficult in his life with the drinking and one thing and another, it seemed to me he went beyond that in coming up with a philosophy, if that's the correct word, of how he viewed the world at that time, which was in a very optimistic way, because there were an awful lot of adults at that point who were not optimistic about anything.
No,
they were
we
scared.
Were gonna get bombed off the face of the earth.
They were afraid of everything
The
in
atom
sight,
bomb
and
and
he
everything.
was thinking well beyond that. So this ability to isolate himself from the everyday world and think through things as he saw them, the more I read the record, the more impressed I am with what he did. That's really all I had to say about that.
I agree.
We've been talking for almost 2 hours.
And I hate to, but I'm going to have to go.
Well, I figured 2 hours would be about as long as all of us could sit still.
I told when we came, I said, now, Bill,